Aloha, Kelly Jones saying good morning and hello from Waikiki Beach. I want to talk to you for a couple of minutes and give my video response to Mary's answer to question number 1. She was talking about everyone's favorite hero or anti-hero, depending on how you look at it, Holden Caulfield in Catcher of the Rye. We were looking at aspects from the 50s that made Caulfield the narrator that he was. The question says, choose a couple of aspects of the 50s, connect it into why Holden acts the way he does, even though some people are shocked by that. Mary brings up a couple of good points. She says that following the end of World War II and the Cold War, she said we became a nation of consumers and people who were obsessed with conformity. And what you said, Mary, was really interesting. It reminded me a lot of the background information that I give when I teach William Golding's novel, Lord of the Flies. I always teach my students about looking at when this happened. Of course, we understand the publication date for Catcher is 1945, so literally right in the heels of the end of the biggest conflict America had known at the time. Golding's publication date for Lord of the Flies, it was almost like it was kind of, in a sense, the British version of these same ideas. His publication date was 1954. And it's interesting, when you talk about becoming a nation of consumers and a nation of conformists and how Holden is kind of rejecting that idea, I completely agree with you. Whenever I talk to kids about, I've got to scroll my notes up there, whenever I talk to kids about what America was like in the 50s, the interesting thing is most of the time their reference point is just TV Land reruns of something like Happy Days. And sometimes when we look at what America was really like during that time and how that's borne out in characters and literature, sometimes they're a little surprised to take a closer look at what some people point out as America's golden age. Kind of, to borrow from Dickens, the best of times, the worst of times. We had prosperity after World War II that we had not seen before in this country. But we also had some tensions that were created after that. Looking at things like the Cold War and McCarthyism, we had a lot of weird behavior that happened right after. And I think the way that you responded to that had a whole lot to do with your birth certificate. People survived the war, and on one hand, they felt compelled to really live while they still had the chance. But there were some that felt coming out of war more introspective. It was kind of, what was the meaning of life? You know, these are the people that had seen it and been affected by it in a much different way. So you had a really interesting dichotomy right after that, almost like two Americas. And again, I think a lot of how you looked at those two Americas had to do with what generation you were a part of. So we've got somebody who's a teenager, upperclassman in high school like Caulfield. He's going to look at these two Americas. He's going to look at this dichotomy in a much different way. The two aspects that I want to connect to him as a character are, one, what I call a survival-fueled desire for achievement. The other aspect that I think that's really important to pay attention to is what I call a new introspection. People had seen firsthand the effects of the bomb, and Caulfield mentions that in specifically, and I'll talk about that just quickly in a second. People had become to a place where they understood that humans possess the power of life and death. They knew for the first time how to kill on an epic scale, and there was that question, kind of, what are we going to do with that? So this contradictory binary sets up a tension that I think we're still trying to sort out a little bit today. Certainly Caulfield was trying to sort it out in his text. We were running scared, just not really what we were running from, not really sure what we're running to. And to me, when I think of that response, not sure what I'm running toward, not sure what I'm running from, I'm just running, that really reminds me a lot of the narrative structure of the text. There is just this constant jumping from thought to thought. And as I read it, I kept thinking, it's almost like he's just thinking to keep himself from thinking. And I think that's a little bit of what we saw post-World War II. When I teach students Lord of the Flies, I have them do a little bit of background, cultural, historically, about the time that was published, 1954. And that's not too far away from this. Here's some interesting things that I would point out. We've got things like Marilyn marrying Joe DiMaggio. RCA manufacturing the first color TV. The words "under God" were added to the Pledge of the United States of America. First issue of Sports Illustrated, Bill Haley and his Comets were rocking around the clock. The first Hyatt Hotel, sorry Hilton, that's where we're staying. The first Hyatt Hotel that was located somewhere outside of a major airport was built in Miami, Florida in 1954, indicating that people suddenly had disposable income. They could go somewhere as a destination that wasn't somewhere that they flew. They were getting their cars. We were mobile. With the first Burger King, the first Miss America, Roger Bannister had broken the 4-minute mile. Survival fueled desire for achievement. We beat the bad guys, yay. All that sounds pretty good, kind of makes you want to go, America, but here's the thing. We can't beat the bad guys without getting our hands dirty, and when we do that, we see a really ugly side of humanity as we're doing what we think is right, and that's so much of what Holden Caulfield's dealing with in this text. There is that new introspection about what it means to beat the bad guys. Sometimes I tell my students, if you think your grandparents are a little bit off their nut, it may help to explain some things about them, because you had teenagers in this time who did not have 24/7 news and did not have worldwide information to access all the time, no social media, and they sincerely believed, an entire generation, that they would not live to see adulthood because of the bomb. So it's important to understand that when you have a protagonist that grows up in a time like this, it's going to be really normal that he feel isolated, angry, confused, disillusioned, exactly the way Caulfield did. He was representing many thousands of young people who didn't know how to feel about their nation, didn't know how to feel about themselves. They weren't sure what that meant, if it meant anything at all. When he asks Sally on, in my copy, this is 169, this is toward the end of chapter 17. He says, did you ever get fed up? Did you ever get scared? Everything was going to go lousy unless you did something. I mean, do you like school and all that stuff? And of course he uses the word phony 18 million times. When he asks her, do you ever feel like I feel? He can't even articulate it. But right behind that sense of disillusionment and confusion, he comes up with this crazy idea. Hey, here's my idea. Let's run off and get married. We're going to go live off the land. We'll go somewhere with a brook and all. We could get married or something. I could chop our own wood. Honest to God, it'd be great. So, but it's almost like when he realizes that he's slipping back into that tradition, it scares the daylights out of him, because right after, 2 pages later, he says, come on, let's get out of here. You give me a royal pain in the ass if you want to know the truth. It's almost as though when he recognized himself slipping into that part of society that he didn't like, he instantly had to pull away. And to me, the most interesting, one of the most interesting comments in the book is right at the end of, I think it's chapter 18. He mentions the bomb specifically. He said, I'm sort of glad they've got the atomic bomb invented. If there's ever another war, I'm going to sit right the hell on top of it. I'll volunteer for it. I swear to God I will. So even though this may have shocked some readers at the time, if you look very carefully at what was going on in the historically and culturally time period, you can understand that he was just somebody who represented a generation of young people who were just trying to figure it all out. So, with that said, mahalo, thanks for listening. Hope you have learned something that you can kind of take and use in your teaching, and we will talk to you soon. Aloha.